We got Tom, pronouns he, him, calling in from wallaby arches. Are they like made of wallabies, or are we just talking about their feet? Are we talking about wallaby feet? Are we? Tom wants to say that petroleum is not exclusively derived from the remains of organic materials. Tom, you are on the line with Forrest and Erika. How are you doing today?
Wow. Well, I'm doing very well, and I'm surprised you're the first caller. How are you doing?
Yeah. Never had a bad day, man.
Oh, well, if we get on the agnosticism stuff, then I might have to bring up the book of Job, and you won't be any help since he had a really bad day. But,
yeah.
All right.
One more reason not to believe in that mess.
I saw the two of you were on a podcast, and it was listed as like 5 months ago, but it might have been longer. I'm not sure. And you were talking to an ID proponent named Andrew from Virginia, I think it was. And toward the end, things got a little heated, and you folks were talking about the evidence from petroleum and that it is necessarily of biological origin. I happen to be one of these crackpots that's a component of it, but not necessarily the only component or even necessarily the major component. So perhaps you can clear up some of the discrepancies that I keep finding I did while watching some of this. I don't know, you want to pick a particular topic of that, or would you like me to do so?
So just to be clear, you're saying the petroleum is either not necessarily or is either not necessarily made of organic material or is not made of organic material, period. I'm having a hard time understanding which one you're going for here.
Oh, there's definitely biological material in petroleum. The biological markers demonstrate that pretty conclusively. But the bulk of it may actually be from much deeper down due to the very high pressure stabilizing reduced hydrocarbons against the temperature and against breakdown into simple methane and graphite. And
okay. Last question from me before we jump right in, and maybe Erika has one, but last question from me at least is, do you have any formal training in either chemistry or geology or anything related to petroleum?
As it happens, this is the topic of my dissertation, so no.
You said it was not. I'm sorry, it was a little hard to hear you. You said it was the topic of your dissertation?
Yes.
Okay, and so when you say dissertation, you mean you have a PhD in specifically addressing this topic? Tom, you're breaking up weirdly. You sound like a robot right now. Can you please repeat what you just said?
I am trained as a chemical engineer, specifically experimental thermodynamics. I squeeze
experimental chemical engineer.
Basically. Yeah, I squeezed propane to ridiculous pressures and temperatures to see what came out, to demonstrate that it wouldn't necessarily be just methane and graphite as the end result. Now, I couldn't prove that wasn't the end result, but along the way, we came up with things that looked an awful lot like a continuum. So
I'm going to ask again because I don't think I got an answer. When you said dissertation, was that for a master's or for a PhD or for something different?
PhD.
Okay, so you have a PhD that is in what?
Chemical engineering. Experimental thermodynamics.
You have a PhD in chemical engineering with a focus on experimental thermodynamics. You have done a dissertation specifically on petroleum and its production, and you have scientific reason to believe that at least a great deal of petroleum is not of biological origin.
That's a good way to put it, although the petroleum aspect was kind of what drove the research. But I really was just looking at the chemical equilibria and kinetics of the hydrocarbon mixtures at these advanced temperatures and pressures. But I'm willing to talk about some of the components of petroleum that I think are fairly conclusive or fairly convincing that it is not necessarily...
because you have an education in this, I'm going to be careful to try to isolate the words biologic and organic, because it would be very easy to get things confused in that context. So just to be clear, you are claiming, of course, obviously petroleum is organic, but it is not biologic.
Yes, because of the nature of the word organic has been used simply to mean hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen, and nitrogen.
Right. So that's why I'm being very clear. It is still carbon based. So when we say, hey, this is full of hydrocarbons, I'm just trying to get ahead of the confusion for the audience. If we're talking about this is full of hydrocarbons, and I say, okay, so it's definitely an organic compound, I am not necessarily saying it is necessarily biologically derived. We're talking about organic, meaning it is carbon based. So, because that is literally, for everybody who doesn't know about it, everybody who doesn't have a background in this, that's what the fucking word organic means. We're talking about chemistry. Organic means carbon. Okay, so Erika, do you have any follow-up questions that you want to start with, just to make sure we're all on the same page?
No follow-up questions, but I'm doing a sort of surface level dive into the literature on this in the background, and I already have some thoughts, but no questions to start off with.
Cool. I was about to start doing that after I got done with my questions too, so that's great.
Yeah,
I can give you some names to.
Actually, I want to ask you. I want to ask you a question really fast, and just to make sure that I'm following this rabbit trail down the right place, Tom. Because what I immediately did is, like, based off of just the topic of the recall, because my understanding of petroleum, of oil, I guess, in general, is this idea that it's like, okay, according to the literature, it seems like the consensus is that most petroleum that we have is of biotic origin, in the sense that it comes from, like, it's like a fossil fuel, right, if you will, from like zooplankton and things of that nature, algae, whatever, over very long periods of time. However, it doesn't. Yeah, petroleum. It seems to not be controversial to say that there is such a thing as abiotic petroleum, like abiogenic petroleum, I guess is the correct term as I'm looking at it here. But that abiogenic sources of oil have never been found in commercially profitable amounts, at least according to the quippy summary of it, just from like getting my outline here on Wikipedia. According to the starter article on Wikipedia, this is an alternative method. And I guess this is for the audience as much as it is for our conversation, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. And Wikipedia describes it as an alternative, as an alternative method for petroleum formation that was initially proposed in the 1850s by Russian scientists. But since then, and this is the line from Wikipedia here, and I'll give you the citation that they give, it's been contradicted by geological and geochemical evidence. They cite, what's the last name here? And then I'll read the line from the conclusions portion of the review. From Resource Geology, volume 58, it's Glasby, just a solo author in 2006, Abiogenic Origin of Hydrocarbons, a historical review. And at the very end, in the summary section of this article, they describe the search for abiogenic sources of hydrocarbons as effectively failures. These failures of the Russian-Ukrainian theory in areas where it has claimed its greatest success, essentially being its role as a viable theory on which to base exploration programs, so the exploration of fossil fuels, I'm assuming there, for commercial hydrocarbon deposits to an end. As a matter of fact, this theory is now largely forgotten even by the former Soviet Union and virtually is unknown in the West. And so to me, it seems like this is an idea, and maybe I'm mischaracterizing you here, but this seems like an idea that does hold a viable scientific basis to it. But the idea that it is anything other than a rare means by which to get petroleum, in the same way that you can get limestone, for example, by strictly biogenic means, you can get abiogenic limestone in caves, like through travertine and things like that. It's just an unusual way to get petroleum, and thus I don't know why we would propose, as I'm sort of getting the vibe from you here, that this is like the dominant means by which we perhaps get it. Is that a fair basic outline of the situation so far?
I'm going to say yes, with some caveats. That since it is proposed to be coming from fairly deep down, we're talking mantle depths, that we're never going to, I shouldn't say never, it is unlikely we will ever be able to drill to those depths to recover it. However, that it might infiltrate porous rocks, which are which are generally sedimentary in nature as opposed to igneous. You're going to find it in many of the same places. There are, however, some abiogenic markers, in particular diamondoids. I'll explain that if you like.
Yes, please do. Abiogenic markers. How, because that was going to be my next question, is how do you actually differentiate between biogenic and abiogenic petroleum? Like, from your perspective as somebody who's written a dissertation on the topic, explain it to a layman like me.
Okay, well, the dissertation came out before the nanodiamonds. There's something called nanodiamonds or diamondoids. Adamantanes are the proper chemical term for it. Are virtually ubiquitous in petroleum. It's been known since the early 90s.
Diamondoids?
Carbon,
you said diamondoids?
Diamondoids, nanodiamonds, adamantanes. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the Marvel comics. Adamantane.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Not adamantine, right. I need to take a step back and talk a little bit about the nature of carbon.
It looks like a shit ton of chair structures all piled on top of each other. That's crazy.
Yes. But most importantly, they are purely carbon-to-carbon bonds, and they are sp3 coordination, if you understand what that means.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. I'm reaching back into my chem and my physics, but yes.
Okay. Well, each carbon is connected to another carbon, which is what diamonds are.
Right, and it gives it that nice lattice structure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, lattice implies repeatable structure. I guess it does, yeah, but that'll work. It's a very complex lattice, though.
Right.
Crystallography is going to be a pain in the neck for that. Diamond is a very good window. Let's talk a little bit about the nature of carbon. Carbon is unique on the periodic table in that, in its pure form, at least at surface condition, it prefers to stay in 2 dimensions rather than branch out into 3. And this is, well, imperfectly disfavored, but it does it for a very particular reason. It forms aromatic structures and stays in graphene sheets. Aromatic rings. The reason being that the p orbital of carbon is very small. This gives rise to a substantial 0-point energy. Can you explain that one?
I would like to hear an explanation of that, yes.
Okay. 0-point energy, it's classically described as why it is that electrons don't spiral down the nucleus at absolute zero. But 0-point energy arises anytime motion is restricted. One way to look at this is that if you restrict the motion of an electron, for example, then the uncertainty in its position is non-zero. Okay, or rather non-infinite, and therefore the momentum and energy going along with that is the energy time construction of the uncertainty principle means that the energy cannot be zero. It has to rise as you restrict the motion more and more. So the point is that when you restrict motion, 0-point energy arises. And that becomes prohibitive for confining electrons to single bonds. The aromatic rings allow them to zip around the corral there and alleviate a good bit of that energy. Now, this holds true at surface pressures quite well. However, the specific gravity, density for the audience, of graphite is about 2.4. that of diamond is 3. So if you squeeze the living snot out of the stuff, you can overcome that 0-point energy restriction and actually begin to form this sp3 coordination, this diamond-like coordination. To get to those sort of ridiculous pressures that we see form these adamantanes, you have to go down to at least near mantle depth. So the near ubiquity of these diamondoids in petroleum suggests that almost all of it has seen very, very, very deep things, far deeper than any biological deposit. That would be one particular point that one might make to say this is virtually an abiogenic marker. Yeah,
so can I? Yeah. So Tom, I get what you're saying. I mean, I think you can sum it up, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think your argument can be summed up by diamondoids are associated with abiotic petroleum. We find diamondoids in most petroleum. Therefore, most petroleum is probably abiotic in origin. Is that fair enough?
Well, yeah, we can't really say what the fraction is biogenic versus abiogenic, but
right.
The fact that the markers there says that particular batch of petroleum has seen some very deep pressures.
Okay.
One thing that helps this is
that was my next question, though, Tom, is because my understanding is that, and my sort of cursory search going on in the background seems to confirm this so far, and I'll continue searching once I throw this to Forrest, but most petroleum does have biogenic markers as well. So I think the next question we have to ask is, which came first, right? Is petroleum forming biogenically and then is acquiring these abiogenic markers because of its position in the crust of the earth or close to the mantle of the earth? Or is it sort of the opposite? Or is it acquiring these biogenic signatures when in reality it was abiogenic in origin? And at least at present, my search seems to be spitting back that most people, the consensus seems to be that this is in fact biogenic, and that the way that they sort of come to that conclusion is that ratio that you're talking about that often knocks it in favor of a biogenic formation, not abiogenic, of a space biogenic formation. So can you maybe explain to me from your perspective why these diamondoids preclude a biogenic origin for this petroleum, or some kind of way to differentiate it to actually push us down the abiogenic direction as opposed to biogenic acquiring some kind of abiogenic signature? Does that make sense?
It does, and I appreciate the way you worded that.
Okay.
One thing I want to toss in is that the isotopic defect is the ratio between carbon-13 to carbon-12.
Yeah.
And that of the diamondoids match that of the petroleum, which pretty clearly state that the diamondoids have a common origin to the petroleum in which they are found. So this does not mean that the petroleum could not have been formed from a biological reservoir, traveled way, way deep down, and then came back up. That's a possibility.
That was my understanding of what at least some people have posited for this, because a lot of our fossil fuels are exposed to immense amount of heat and pressure just for their formation. Something like coal comes to mind, and I'm certainly not a geologist, but I'm adjacent enough to it to know that heat and pressure is the name of the game with a lot of this stuff. So I think if you're going to make a claim like most petroleum is abiogenic in origin, you have to be able to set up a model that will differentiate the two, right? That says, okay, here's how we tell the difference compositionally between biogenic petroleum that has picked up an abiogenetic. These terms are too similar to other terms of biology and in chemistry, but it's like that has picked up an abiogenic signature as opposed to being critical to its formation. And what you've just said, like especially with the relation of diamondoids and the C13, C4, or no, C12, C13 ratios, kind of makes me think that if biogenic formation is still on the table, even in this particular argument, that I don't think that's enough to push me down that whole way of, okay, actually most petroleum is of abiogenic origin.
Good. That's a very skeptical point of view. And yes, if you're doing reasonably complete search, you'll find out that I am considered a crackpot for believing this. This is not mainstream thought. I, in fact, attended an interesting Hedberg lecture back in 2001 in Calgary.
You cut out there for just a second. Back up one sentence, just because I lost you there for a second.
I attended a Hedberg series of lectures. It was put on by the AAPG, the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, in Calgary, Alberta, back in 2001, I think it was. It might be. And boy, I'm really glad that weapons were not allowed in the door, because this was more heated than most of your call-ins get to be. It was kind of fun to watch. It was kind of fun to watch since I didn't really have a dog in the fight. And I don't really think it's all that important, either for exploration or for explanation of too many other things. Although if you want to talk about
may I interrupt here and ask you, Tom, when did this conference take place that got so heated? Because I've got a paper that I've just pulled up in the background that I think is particularly interesting for what I think was your most compelling point. I'm curious if this paper was involved. The paper's by Jiang et al. It's from 2021. And it's called Diamondoids in Petroleum, Their Potential as Source and Maturity Indicators. And I clicked on it because I was like, okay, maturity, and they're bearing on the source of petroleum. That seems relevant to this conversation. And just in the highlights section, they argue that pyrolysis experiments on 4 organic matter types simulate diamondoid evolution. Their PCA explained the main factors affecting diamondoid indices. Their PCA Fisher discriminant analysis model objectively identifies oil source types, and their PCA regression model quantitatively predicted oil thermal maturity. And what that highlight section combined with their abstract and their graphical abstract, which is kind of hard for me to understand here, seems to suggest that you can get diamondoids from organic compounds, like without needing to be, I guess, in the high stakes abiogenic habitat, if you will, for lack of a better term, of the mantle. Right. So this seems to suggest that you can get these diamondoids, which I guess I was under the impression that those diamondoids really pushed us in favor of abiogenic origin under biogenic conditions. Would that not make it a little problematic to use diamondoids as this reason to point towards abiogenic origin for petroleum?
Yes, but the reason why diamonds are stable at surface conditions is because they are kinetically stable, not stable equilibrium. So what you're describing, the pyrolysis generation of these things, and by the way, this is done commercially, usually starting with coal, is a matter of creating these rather rapidly and then freezing them out. In fact, that is the natural way that diamonds arise. The one on, for example, are found in kimberlite pipes because they rocket up very rapidly from deep in the earth.
That makes sense. And that tracks with what I'm seeing in the introduction here.
Yeah. So, yes, they can be produced pyrolytically, but you're talking about very high temperatures for a very short period of time. So, to suggest that somehow the petroleum was in contact with a very high temperature source for a very short period of time and then cooled rapidly possible, but it's a little surprising, as is the suggestion that petroleum traveled deep, deep, deep down and came back up. Both of these are a little difficult to buy into, at least for me. But then, of course, I'm a true believer, so there you go.
I think I would have to be, I mean, I don't know how common it is. Like, I don't know anything about sedimentology in the sense that it's like, if you're in oil exploration or I guess whatever, if you're like a petroleum basin modeler or whatever, like however that works, I would be really curious to answer this question. Like, how do the thermal conditions of the neighboring areas and like the thermal history of the sediment or the strata, I guess I should say, that the oil is typically found in, bear into the likelihood that a certain area is going to have oil, right? Like, is oil typically associated with a tumultuous thermal past of a geologic formation, I guess? Because if that's true, that has a lot of bearing on this question, because if oil is consistently found in thermally active areas or areas with an intense thermal history, would that not suggest that what we're talking about here is likely at play?
It's possibly at play. I'm not sure about likely, but you'll find petroleum in all over the earth, but invariably in porous rocks, which are the sedimentary ones, which point, well, that has been used to point to these things. We can go on about the diamondoids. Can I add something else in here?
Yes, and I want to kick it to Forrest too really quickly, because he's been quiet for a minute. I feel like I've been monopolizing.
No, you're just fine.
Sure.
I've been over here just digging around. So like, finish where you're at, and then I'll jump in a minute. I've been digging just on some stuff, and I have a couple of specific questions.
I realize I've been preaching, but I'd also like to point to something that when you talk about the sources of the source material that is proposed to mature into petroleum. By the way, that's what the meaning of maturity is. It's not the age; it's how far along it's progressed from.
Yes, I was more meaning in the sense of the source, like the source within any given geologic formation. What allows for the formation of that petroleum, or if we're talking about some other kind of fossil fuel, that one. I didn't mean to mislead anybody.
Good. So, petroleum is largely, well, it differs from coal, and that coal is largely from terrestrial, like trees and this sort of thing.
Right.
But petroleum is largely believed to come from, it's largely believed to come from marine sediment, so phytoplankton and krill and that sort of thing. So you've got both plant and animal. But the chitin in the krill, as well as the cellulose in the phytoplankton, will be, well, it does contain a decent amount of oxygen, even in the backbone structure. This is not found in the petroleum. So there has to be a mechanism by which the oxygen is selectively abstracted from the from that background, from that backbone structure, almost complete. And this is going to sound like an argument from incredulity, but it's hard for me to see how that could happen so ubiquitously in the petroleum. It's possible. But again, that seems to point to why is this so thoroughly reduced, whereas the source material is only partially reduced. Possible, it could change that way, and maybe this high temperature maturation that you're talking about has something to do with it. But I nevertheless find it surprising, as well as kind of surprising that we don't see more heteroatoms in the petroleum in the backbone structure, when that is, it won't be in either the chitin or the cellulose. But
I wish I could offer, I suppose I wish I could offer anything more than an argument from, I looked at the literature briefly, and at least the field claims to have an explanation for these diamondoids. I just pulled, like, I guess an explanation isn't the right way of putting it, an explanation and a mechanism for different types of diamondoids in different types of petroleum. Now, granted, what I can see here is that I think I called it pyrolysis. Pyrolysis is you pronounced it, I think, in the correct way. Yeah, I think I led us in the wrong direction when I pronounced it wrong earlier. But I'm looking at a paper right now by Ma et al., or no, just Ma alone, from 2016 from the Journal of Natural Gas Geoscience, titled "Advancement and Application of Diamondoids on Organic Geochemistry." The citation list is pretty extensive, but they've got this nice little bit in 4.3 called "The Possible Origin of Diamondoids in Oil" that at least it attempts to put forward. And I wish I could tell you that I find it compelling or that I don't, but I don't have a good enough background in geochemistry to say. They offer that diamondoids in oil have three different origins. One, free diamondoids that are probably formed during the generation of oils. This component in the terem oil, which can be determined in the original oil, comprises, and it gives you a bunch of different ratios and measurements of the diamondoids, diamantanes, and adamantanes, which you mentioned earlier. The second one is that they're preserved in oil and in other forms. Details on the structures of this component are not clear. However, they are released or transformed at a relatively low level of maturity. And then three, diamondoids formed during oil cracking. A certain proportion of diamondoids are present in oils. The formation of abundant diamondoids occurs at relatively high levels of maturity. I think they're just proposing the origin, and then they give at a certain glance, at least from my untrained eyes, a mechanism in the preceding text for like how you might get them in three separate ways or three separate types. I'm not really sure which. So to me, and I'll summarize my perspective here and then sort of toss it to Forrest, I think that there's a big difference between saying the current explanation or the current mechanisms for diamondoids in biogenic or proposed biogenic oils is not compelling to me, and then saying that therefore most petroleum must be abiogenic. To me, those are two different things. And I don't know enough about the field to throw my hat in. You said that people consider the abiogenic petroleum idea to be like crack pottery. I don't know enough about the field to say, so I can't say that it sounds crazy to me, because the way that you've presented it, it makes it seem rather straightforward. Although even in this conversation, I don't find myself thinking, holy cow, every petroleum must actually, or at least the majority of petroleums must be abiogenic in origin. Instead, I find myself thinking like, oh, I wish I knew more about this subject, but I'm not at the point yet where it seems like the field is at a loss. Like it seems like when I look at the literature that there are explanations that do exist for this, and you have issues with those in the sense that, as you said, you're a bit incredulous as to whether or not those can explain most petroleums. But I don't know if that's going to do it for me as far as pushing me in the abiogenic petroleum direction. Forrest, thoughts?
Yes. So while you've been going, I've just kind of been doing some perusing. I also hit up, the just primary literature and trying to find stuff. I'm having a really hard time finding anything about this past 2007. That's the latest. I found a few things from 2006. I found one thing from 2007. I haven't found anything that really digs into taking this super seriously and like actually discussing it past that point. So I'm kind of coming into this with a grain of salt, understanding that the best information I can get so far is at least 20 years behind, right? I don't know, Tom, when you did your research or where you're coming from at this. So I don't want to. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you are not kept up with the field since early 2000s, and even then I was kind of out of it simply because I needed to have a job to pay the bills, and
right,
Crackpot was to help with that. So I went ahead and did an awful lot of just high pressure work in other fields. I am now retired, and so I have the right to wander around and mutter to myself and be a bit of an oddball. But nevertheless, the prevailing approach to this has been, I think, unnecessarily thick. And I didn't call in so much to convince you that this is so. It is more a matter of seeing this earlier discussion that you had. I thought that you were perhaps being a bit don't want to use
there?
I'm still here.
So
I just didn't want. I'm trying to describe my motivation for calling in.
Yeah.
The way in which this was presented from 6 months ago or thereabouts, when you were discussing this with that very hard-headed ID proponent, who's a bit of an idiot.
You're breaking up a little bit. It's kind of hard to keep track, but I appreciate the call. I'm not upset about the call at all. Like I said at the beginning, worst case scenario here, I learned a new thing and I'm very happy. So like, don't worry about bringing this up. What I've come to, just I want to be very clear. I'm a biologist. I'm not in this field at all. So I'm trying my best. I'm trying to keep up. What I've learned so far, just from kind of sitting here while Erika was talking to you, is that abiotic theory is there's a couple of different main theories that are presented, or different parts of it. First is the Russian-Ukrainian theory, used to be called Soviet theory. That's where this really started, from what I can understand. It was back when the Soviets were looking for, and that seems to be what you're bringing up mainly. Let me see if I can find this description of it here.
Can I give you?
Oh my God.
Can I give you a bit of the history of that?
So yeah, you can if you'd like. Basically, what I'm learning is that there's that, and then there's this other one that is about off-gassing. Let me try to find them both. I'm pulling from Abiogenic Origin of Hydrocarbons, a historical review by Glasby from the University of Tokyo back in 2006. That's what I'm pulling from right now.
That's the one that I saw earlier as well. Yeah, I'll add to that. I'll add to just really briefly, just since we're still on the topic. And this will kind of be my last addition to this, just because I'm also kind of a numbskull when it comes to straight geochemistry stuff like this, Tom. But I did find. Oh, go ahead.
You guys are doing great. Don't apologize for that.
But it's always fun to have a conversation about something that you don't know very much about with somebody who knows more, because then you can sit there and be like, okay, if I'm getting this right, then this is what I'm understanding it as, and then they get to be like, yay, or they get to be like, no, and slam dunk you. Which you've been very gracious, Tom. I'm looking at this, like, this is like a website for baby's first geochemistry, so I guess take it with a grain of salt. And the title kind of says it all: crude oil evidences for its biological origin, from January 5th of this year. And it rounds it off with like these take-home messages. It's got actually a really nice references section that I think is quite helpful, at least for somebody like me, if I wanted to like dig more into it. But this seems to argue that this is from 2025, so I think it's a pretty decent recent source. They say there's a wealth of evidence for biological origin of oils, including the presence of molecules that derive directly from molecules synthesized by living organisms, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. They talk about porphyrins, which are ubiquitous molecules in oils. I didn't know they were ubiquitous in oils. Maybe you can confirm or deny that are derived from different types of chlorophyll. So that's going to be like from your plants, from your algae that you mentioned earlier. Similarly, fossil molecules are found in crude oils that can be easily attached to other pigments. Carotenoids, they say, for example, or molecules that make up cell walls for prokaryotes or eukaryotes. And then interestingly, they say the greater proportion of C12 compared to C13 in petroleum molecules, the so-called isotopic signature, which you mentioned earlier, and I wrote down incorrectly C13, C14, so I hope I didn't call it that earlier, is also in favor of biological origin, since life selects the light isotope in the same proportions. Then they say in more than 99% of oil fields are located in sedimentary basins, sediments deposited on the bottoms of ancient seas or lakes where life was present, as shown by mineralized fossils. That's super interesting to me, because that means that we're not looking at a thermally, I guess I should say, tumultuous past. And then they say, generally speaking, oil source rocks contain mainly organic matter derived from marine or lacustrine phytoplankton biomass, more or less modified by bacteria. So if 99% of oil fields are located in sedimentary basins, that kind of makes it hard for me to understand how you might argue that most of it is coming from high pressure scenarios or high pressure contexts in the mantle. But I just derailed us by reading that message just to remember. So I'll give it back to you.
You're right where I was, because like I was looking at, basically I was doing like this primary kind of like history and just trying to get an introduction, a background. And I found the other thing that I forgot the goddamn name of. There's Russian-Ukrainian theory, which is what it sounds like you're saying, Tom, that petroleum is a primordial material that is from deep within the earth in the upper mantle, and it's coming up seeping up for some reason or another. And then there's Thomas Gold's deep gas theory. I couldn't remember that because it sounds like an attraction at fucking Branson, Thomas Gold's deep gas. And like that is that methane from the mantle converts into higher hydrocarbons in the crust. And that's this idea that like methane is so stable at this pressure or temperature, whatever the fuck, and that it's able to combine with other alkanes as it moves up through the crust somehow. I again can't stress enough how much of an organic chemist I'm not. So like, it sounds to me like you're giving us a version of this Russian-Ukrainian theory, which seems to have been started in like the idea of an abiotic origin of petroleum in the first place was from the mid 1800s. It goes back as far as fucking Mendeleev. And then you have this really big like push for the Soviets. I found that like of the couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand papers about this, like 90% of them are in Russian. And there's like a handful that are even mentioned in English. And then by the 1960s, it was pretty solid, overwhelming evidence for a biotic origin, and this was kind of pushed aside. I know you were very honest about the fact that you said, I know I'm on the fringe here. I really do appreciate that. That's great. So I'm kind of trying to just put together, I'm taking every pretense out of my head here and just looking at this as this is, Darwin and Huxley. This is an old idea, but a good idea that has been kind of overshadowed by modern stuff that may be missing something big. And I'm trying to come at it from that angle. And I have a couple of questions just for clarification. So far, am I on the right track? Am I blowing it on any of the history here?
I would like to flesh out that history a bit if you don't mind, but I'll wait till after your questions. Then
if it's relevant and if it's going to help me understand better, I'd love to hear some more history. But like, I just want to make sure I'm keeping as close as I can.
Okay. Well, why don't you go ahead with your questions? I'll hit the history. We'll come back to that, and then if we have time, I'd like to give you a couple of examples that may or may not surprise you, that are closer to your fields.
Sure. Okay, so one quick question that I have, just as a clarifying question. I think you mentioned this with Erika, but I didn't hear it because I was busy doing stupid shit over here. Did you mention a specific age for this abiotic petroleum? Are you saying that it is necessarily very old? Are you saying that it could be much younger than we expect petroleum to be? Like, what age would you say that petroleum is, considering an abiotic origin?
Oh, I'm not sure. I guess the honest answer I would give is I'm not sure that that's relevant, that the age matters if you're going to talk about a biological origin, because then you need to know when this was laid down and what was there at the time. And
I think the age matters if I'm going to discount a biological origin a little bit as well, considering the fact that, like, just coming from a skeptical lens here, the everything that I have ever learned in science and my limited understanding of geology and my brief foray into organic chemistry and all these things, that the overwhelming consensus is that this is biological in origin. And for that reason, you guys are talking a little bit about carbon a second ago. Everything that I'm double and quadruple checking here, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that the isotopic signature in this is going to be carbon-12. It just is. And it's going to be, if there's any higher signatures, any higher isotopes, those are going to be rarities, right? This is predominantly, overwhelmingly carbon-12, right?
Yes, but that's not the point. That you are
the reason
correct,
why.
But
the reason why that tells me that it's probably very old is because, like, C4 plants that would more reliably trap carbon-13 are only evolving about 30 or 50 million years ago. And so, like, if this is indeed from long dead organic matter, I would expect it to have that signature. Now, if it's from an abiotic source as well, it could also have that signature. But that at least tells me that no matter which way we're looking at it, is very fucking old. It is at least more than 50 million years old. And so that alone kind of gets me in that direction. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. If you're saying this is a new thing, that opens up a totally different field of questions that I don't want to waste our time with. So that's why I'm asking you, are you positing that this is a recent development that this petroleum came up in the last couple million years, or are you saying that this is an extremely old material that is just now getting to a point where we can harvest it?
I am not going to posit a recent, as in last, well, after the KT boundary, let's say.
Okay, cool.
I'm not going to say that. But
sweet. Well, then we're on the same page.
Let me flesh out a little bit of the proposed mechanism by which it arrives where you find it. That is, at these very deep conditions in temperature and pressure, the heavier hydrocarbons are going to be soluble in a lighter hydrocarbon, primarily methane stream, which will work its way upwards because it weighs less than the rock. That's why you get outgassing of, even helium-3, which is another interesting story, but we'll keep that alone. So as it works its way up, the pressure drops and the heavier hydrocarbons can drop out at a particular depth. But where you find petroleum is in porous rocks, which are the sedimentary ones. And when you find it in any accumulation, it's under what's called a cap rock, something which is fairly impervious to motion of petroleum. It gets trapped there, and that's how you find it. You drill through a cap rock to get to the petroleum. But if it's coming up from down below, it'll be trapped as if the rain were coming up from the pavement and being caught in your umbrella. Okay? So,
I'm sorry. You're cutting in and out, and I'm having a hard time tracking. Could you please repeat that last part?
Okay. If it is coming up from down below,
right,
it will get trapped under a cap rock. And I made a very silly analogy there that it's as if the rain is coming up off the pavement and being trapped in your umbrella. Okay.
Okay.
As opposed to the rain blowing sideways. But this analogy is getting too ridiculous. Never mind that.
I just learned what a cap rock was. I'm happy. I'm having a great time.
Okay, but you will find it in porous rock, which is going to be sedimentary, which is a dead ringer for why you have. It is a very good explanation for why you have these biological markers that you're talking about. They would be laid down at a similar time or very nearby in the sedimentary rock. But that does not mean that they didn't get washed in. Now, I don't know anything about the isotopic ratios between the petroleum and these biological markers, and I admit that I am at least 20 years out of date on them. But that would explain why one sees ubiquitous biological markers, even if the bulk of the heavier stuff that's coming up, or reported to be coming up, might not be of the same origin. So, it would be old in that it.
Okay. Hey, Tom, real quick, I was muted and I was just talking because I didn't want anybody to hear me drinking my water a minute ago. I'm sorry to interrupt. I tried to get in on a gap earlier, but then it turned out I was muted. It doesn't matter. I'm putting a link in the chat that is sort of an up-to-date, because you mentioned that it's been a couple of years since you've looked at this. I'm putting the link that I just read a little bit ago in the chat because it's from this year, and it's got a ton of useful sources at the bottom. If you're still interested in digging deep into this stuff, it might be, I mean, you know the area better than I do, so it might be interesting for you to take a look at it and then let us know if your mind has changed or if you still think abiogenic petroleum is the way to go. But I'm just going to let you know that it is in the chat now, so you can access it if you'd like. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. So I think I'll put forward at least the bare bones of this description. If you'd like to hear some of the interesting history of the science, as you were talking about, Darwin and Huxley and that sort of thing, I can go into that and possibly even talk a little bit about some popular misconceptions that are still being pushed forward in schools. At least they were when last I looked. That might be well explained by some of them.
I guess we're coming up on an hour in, and I want to ask a couple of very specific questions just to see how you. No, you're fine. That's the point of the show. It's just we have lines full behind this, and I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to talk about this longer, but like I just want to ask a couple of specific questions. So,
yes,
it is my understanding, as in the summary here on the Walters paper, I think it was. The theory that petroleum originates from sedimentary organic matter that was once living organisms is consistent with all natural observations, laboratory analyses, and experiments, theoretical considerations, and basin simulations. The accumulation of economic quantities of petroleum, oil, and gas requires that a series of processes occur within sedimentary basins. Organic-rich sediments, again, not biologic for the audience out there, organic-rich sediments are deposited only under specific conditions that promote the production of biota and or transport of biogenic organic compounds and selective preservation of this material. That's what I've always been taught, and that's what this paper is concluding back in 2006. That was actually comparing and contrasting these different things. Considering that, and this paper is written by a guy who I believe was from ExxonMobil, and that kind of got me thinking. I was reading that, and I'm looking at this fucker's profile here. The major hang up here that Erika brought up at the very beginning, and that I keep seeing over and over and over and over and over, is that yes, technically, sure, maybe, why not, abiotic production of petroleum is possible. It is not apparently possible in commercially profitable or useful quantities. But what we do find in mass quantities is what appears to be biotically sourced petroleum. And one thing that I know about the fossil fuel industry is that they do radiometric dating, and they actually go out and they work with paleontologists to go out and say, okay, where is the old ass rock from the Carboniferous specifically? Where's the shit from the Permian Basin specifically? Where's the stuff that is specifically going to be rich in organic matter from a time long enough at a depth deep enough to create petroleum, as it is based in our laboratory analyses of how this shit gets made from biotic material, right? So my question to you is, I appreciate you saying you realize this is a fringe idea, but if this should be mainstream, then why is this multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation, why is this industry, which has every incentive to use any fringe idea possible to make more money, why are they going with this, saying that this is definitely biological and that this is the way that we can test it, track it, find it, and reliably make a lot of money on it? Why is that the way that they're doing it, and why are they successful?
Very good questions. And the answer is that this is a scientific question, not so much one of capitalism. Not that I have a problem with capitalism, but
the thing is, I think capitalism is going to do whatever the science is that makes the most money, and the science that makes the most money is the science that works.
Yes, but you're not going to look in different places based upon which of these theories you hold to. Again, if it's going to be found, it's going to be found in the same places that a biological source would place it, because it would be called under caprock in sedimentary rock.
If I may, on that point though, because I mentioned this earlier, that's why we have to have a way to discriminate them, right? Because it's like being able to discriminate between abiogenic oil or petroleum that is forming where biogenic petroleum is also forming versus it actually being biogenic is kind of necessary for answering this question. I'm going to draw a parallel here that I'm drawing this just because it's fresh on my mind. I do not think that these are in the same ballpark, but it reminds me a little bit of sometimes when I interact with intelligent design folks, they will say that God could have created things to kind of make it look like evolution is at play. But then how do you actually discriminate between those two potentials, right? That's what I'm looking for here with this abiogenic versus biogenic petroleum formation, a means by which to discriminate. Now, Forrest's point earlier, I think, is really well met, and your point is well met too. Like, I can see first of all, capitalism is going to do what works. And if we're talking about finding fossil fuels, it's going to use whatever method works. But it is well met and appreciated that it's like, if they're forming in the same places, maybe it's not a question that is actually relevant to fossil fuel discovery. Fair enough. But you know what is really relevant towards fossil fuel discovery is if petroleum is actually a renewable resource. If the Earth can actually make more petroleum, then suddenly this becomes a very relevant question to capital, right? And it becomes a very relevant question towards the fossil fuel industry, one that I would imagine, and I can't guarantee this, but I would imagine there would be a lot of money towards supporting that notion. Because if fossil fuels are actually renewable, then why would we worry about switching to renewables or to renewables when oil and petroleum in general is itself renewable? That would be a PR gift to them, I think, if we found out that it were in fact renewable resource.
No, that would be a bad idea. And I appreciate what you're saying, but the problem with the non-renewables and burning petroleum is that A, petroleum is valuable, and B, the carbon dioxide you kick off is the real problem there.
But they don't believe that it is what I'm saying. They don't believe that it's a problem. So to them, if it's a renewable resource and they already don't believe that CO2 is bad, which Trump is explicitly directing the EPA to gut the 2009 Clean Air Act to retroactively say that CO2 actually isn't a pollutant, right? If that's the case, then that suddenly opens the field up wide open to say, okay, not only is CO2 not harmful, but we have an unlimited amount of petroleum to burn. And then suddenly it becomes a very smart idea if you're trying to appeal to a very particular sect of people, at least here in the United States. I'm not saying that it's right, but God knows I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that I could see that as an avenue for them.
Okay, well, one of the areas that I worked in after I decided I didn't want to spend my life ranting at people was I worked in the National Laboratory. Some of the things I worked on included creating proposals to NASA, specifically toward things having to do with tracking atmospheric changes due to carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. And so I don't mean to discount your point here, but they're way, 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 way wrong. This seriously is a problem, and just speaking as a chemist, looking at the change in the background concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has changed from 0.03%.
We are so on the same page on this. It's crazy. Like you and me are on the same page with regard to this. I totally agree. My problem is that we, in some senses, especially in the sciences, unfortunately, in the United States, live in something of a post-truth era with the current administration that does not seem to care what the science actually says. Right? Like it is ubiquitous across the board that CO2 is a greenhouse gas that has an insulation effect on the planet and negatively impacts ecosystems all across the globe, including the ones we live in, right? Like we know this. This is non-debatable. We're on the same page. The problem I have isn't with you or with the idea of abiogenic petroleum being, even the dominant means of formation. All I was trying to say is that there is an avenue there for super wickedly bad faith actors to weaponize that in the same way that they weaponize a lot of things, whether they're true or not. That's all I was trying to say.
I also want to throw out there, just like it was, since we're talking about like this commercial industries and everything, there have also been actual scientific attempts to use the method that you're talking about here. In this paper here, I've got the Gravberg 1 and Stenberg 1 wells in the, I'm going to say this so terribly, Siljan ring, Sweden, which failed to find any significant result. They were using the methods that you're talking about. They're using the theory that you're talking about. They're focusing on that same Russian-Ukrainian theory. And they said even amounts for evidence for trace amounts of abiotic hydrocarbon it's controversial up to the point when this paper was published in 2006. No convincing evidence for a dominant mantle source of hydrocarbons, period. And so like
Right.
It's not just that these people are way wrong because they're not trying the thing that you think they should be trying. They did try the thing. Scientists that were coming up with these ideas tried the things you think they should be trying, and you have a complete empirical failure. And so, like, you have no commercial utility, you have no empirical backing, you have a theoretical idea which was popular 100 years ago, and now since the past decade since the past in this century, it just hasn't really been taken seriously, because overwhelmingly every single time we run these tests, we run these experiments, we go out drilling as if things did have a biotic origin, it works. And so I want to know, like, if you, maybe you're right, maybe you do have something here, that there is something more to this. Maybe I'm not willing to say I don't. You're completely wrong, right? But if you don't have a commercial utility and you don't have like empirical verifiability, what do you have to convince people of this? Besides theoretically, possibly it could maybe happen, which it doesn't sound like anybody in this industry disagrees with.
Okay, well, all good points. And again, I do want to stress, this is not going to change where people look for petroleum. And the Sicilian ring, for example, by the way, is the site of a meteor impact that shattered granite very deep down, and coming up from this granite, where there are no source rocks anywhere nearby, is a large supply of methane that will sustain a flame at the surface. And this guy Tommy Gold, we talked about before, who is a gadfly and made a lot of people very, very angry, by this astrophysicist who, with a master's degree, who told a whole bunch of geochemists, you're foolish, you're naive, and you're wrong, and they didn't like that. And so that kind of threw some fuel on the fire to make this so bloody controversial for a while there. But again, we're getting into the history there. Yes, they drilled in the Sicilian ring. Much of the granite had been glued back together basically by carbonate material. You also find this in Oklahoma, I think it's in the Anadarko Basin. In fact, there's a town called Cement, because the ground is so hard. But where did that carbonate come from to glue it back together? Anyway, you're right. You will not find, they did not find commercially usable quantities in the Sicilian ring. And I don't think this is going to point anybody into looking in different areas. And I don't have a dog in the fight anymore. But it is a very interesting background here. I'm not sure I can prove it, but it is something to bear in mind, that that's not necessarily where all this is coming from. Now, to tie it into some of your fields, think about the La Brea tar pit. What is taught to students, or at least was when I was back in Shavetail, was that critters would wander into this, get mired in the tar, get stuck. Saber-toothed tiger would see this stuck mammoth, or mastodon probably, and go after that and get stuck as well, and they would just flail about with the tar, pulling them deeper down into the organic quicksand until they died. Nonsense. Have you ever seen anybody do that? Animals do that apart from like insects being caught in sap? No. What's happening is that there's a great deal of methane coming up with this, which is bearing these hydrocarbons to drop out as the tar. And these animals wandered into an area where there's an awful lot of methane in the atmosphere. They passed out and died. They asphyxiated. That's why there's so many of them there.
Sorry, again, not a chemist. Is methane heavy enough to sink like carbon dioxide in that way?
It wouldn't necessarily.
Because that's the thing that happens. That what I understand, if I'm remembering a couple of things, there are places that are called like caves of death and things that just have a shit ton of carbon dioxide in the cave that you walk down into a basin and then you just asphyxiate and die. Those are things. And ancient people didn't know what that was, and they thought it was ghosts and whatever. And that was a thing, religion. And so, yeah, animals get trapped in there and they die. I also know that like the Oracle of Delphi and shit like that, like ancient Greece, they were sitting over like a gas vent where I think it was methane that was coming up from the earth. That you can't smell it, but it rises, and I think it was methane. I'm pretty sure methane, as the lightest alkane, is going to be doing that. And that you have this, it's just floating, and that's giving them hallucinations. They're being gassed, right? So why would it make sense to say that this deep methane is so light that it's rising from the earth and then is somehow being trapped in a basin, which also happens to have a shit ton of tar for no reason, and therefore animals are being gassed in this way? Like that, I'm sorry, like that those don't click in my head.
Not traps. Now, the way to think about this is that the molecular weight of air is 28.84, just because of the mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. That of carbon dioxide is going to be 44. You just add up, 1 carbon, 2 oxygens.
Right.
And methane is much lighter than both of those. So it's not going to get trapped by sitting in a basin like that.
So you would need an extreme... You need an extreme continuous release of methane then to make your idea work.
Only if you insist that it must be uniform across the entire area. If there are some
and also, I want to point out that what you're proposing there sounds an awful lot more like that Thomas Gold theory rather than the Russian-Ukrainian theory.
Well, yeah, Tommy Gold was an interesting guy. He, in fact, was at the university where I was when I was doing this. And yeah, he has some really interesting theories. He got to be very, very right or very, very wrong on all of them. But anyway, if you're going to asphyxiate these animals, all you need is that a localized area, like it's streaming up through a particular fissure, and they spent too much time close to the leaking gas pipe, basically. That's all it would really be required there. It would not be trapped in the caves, which is an enclosed area that you're talking about carbon dioxide. Interesting idea, but there you go. There is another example in Italy. There is a mountain called Averno, which the Romans believed to be the entrance to the gates of hell. Averno means no birds. That's what it translates to. The reason being that it is an old volcano, and the emissions still coming up from the caldera basically killed off or drove away any birds that were that flew over the mountain. So there you have another example of things upwelling now. I don't know if methane or not, and probably not all that relevant to this discussion. But there you have it. There are situations where I feel like we're getting even innocuous.
I feel like we're getting back off track.
Okay, fine.
So basically, here's where I'm at with it, and I want to turn it over. I want to ask Erika if you agree with this. Not with him, with me. We've been going for an hour and 6 minutes now, and I feel like what we've done here is we've done a thorough lit review, as thorough of a lit review as you can do on a call-in show live on air. And I think we've covered every angle of this hypothesis, this idea that we can possibly cover, given the time available. And I feel like the one thing we all agree on, all three of us, is that this is not a commercially or scientifically viable idea. It's something that you think is very real and very reasonable to believe in, but it lacks any substantive evidence. And so for that reason, I'm you already said several times you don't think anyone's going to be super convinced by this. I appreciate you bringing it to my attention. I didn't know this was the thing before, but like I have learned a lot of things about why I don't believe this. I have not learned anything about why I think this is something that's very real. And I think you expect that, as you said, that this is a fringe idea. I don't mean this to be condescending. I can understand how it might be taken as condescending. I mean this sincerely, Tom. I really fucking hope that you go find some research position doing this and publish some really cool shit about this. And if there's something to learn from this, I hope you change our minds, because it would be immensely cool if you were right. But I'm not convinced that you are at this moment. And I really appreciate you talking to us for an hour and being so eloquent with your points and being very kind and courteous with us, questioning you and probing you. I think you've been a great guest, but I think it's time for us to move on.
I'll add one quick thing. Thank you, and I don't think I really want to jump back into this at this end of my career sort of time. But one of the differences that I would like to point out is that Erika was talking about likening this to the ID folks. There's nothing supernatural that I'm proposing here. So this is at least, there's none of that going on. So that at least, if nothing else, please keep in your mind as this is a possible tool in the box when you're discussing this with other folks.
For sure, Tom. All I meant by that, I didn't mean to draw aspersions in the sense that what you were saying was anything like ID. The only connection that I was drawing is that it was reminiscent in the moment of like, okay, we have to have a means to discriminate, right? That's all I was trying to say. Like, I do not think that this is in the same ballpark as intelligent design. Do not worry. I was not thinking that at all. I was just making an analogy or drawing a comparison, I guess is a better way of putting it, as to like, when we're designing experiments, when we're trying to isolate hypotheses, as you know, probably way better than I do, given you're at the end of a what I assume is quite a successful career in geochemistry or in engineering at the very least. You got to be able to discriminate between hypotheses when you design an experiment. That's the perfect experiment will discriminate cleanly between two different hypotheses, provide support for one, neglect or deny support for the other. That's all I was trying to say. Thank you so much. I'll echo what Forrest said. This has actually been an elucidating call for me in the sense that it's like, I don't think I've ever sat down on Google Scholar and put in abiogenic petroleum formation. So it's like,
I wouldn't have ever thought to.
I learned a lot. Yeah. And I learned a lot. And chat loved it. They were into it as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
have an awesome rest of your day, Tom.
Thanks very much for listening. Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for calling. Take care.
Oh, yeah. Right out.
Bye-bye. That was fun. It was. I've got. This is like my third whiteboard full of notes, and I'm just.
Haters will eat their words. This will be clipped and get 1.6 million views because people are invested in biogenic versus abiogenic petroleum formation. And, we've got some curmudgeons in the chat right now. I'm coming to your house. I want you to know that.
Mud your crumbs somewhere else. Honestly, I think the biggest thing, and this is stupid, but like, did you Google diamondoids and find that diagram on Wikipedia where it looked like fucking like a bunch of, it looked like more three-dimensional chairs stuck together in a weird way? That got me excited. Not only that, but just diamondoid, the word, was like, oh man, that's hype. Like I hear diamondoid, I'm getting hype. I hear adamandoid or whatever. I'm like, I'm interested. Suddenly, you had my curiosity. Now you've got my attention. I was interested. And what I will say is I was surprised by how comprehensible a lot of the papers on this were. So for those of you out there who are really championing the bit for more. This is what I'm talking about. Look at these.
Those are beautiful. They're beautiful.
Those are so cool.
They're beautiful.
You're telling me that's not several chairs, like all in the dumbest configuration possible and somehow still a lattice? I love it.
The people are hungry for this kind of thing. They want more of this.
I love it.
In fact, chat will be thrilled to know that every other call on the line tonight is actually related to geochemistry. They're all it's all just geochemistry related calls. We're shutting everything else down.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, Pokemon Master and Executive Producer on The Line. Would you like to support a specific show on The Line or The Line in general? There are special tiers on our Patreon and in our channel memberships. You can do just that. By the way, you could consider leaving a super thanks down below. You could also like, subscribe, and leave a regular comment. All of these are great. Now, I'm going to get back to crushing loneliness, but while I do that, why don't you check out one of these?